Brad Humphrey, and this is another Learning While Listening podcast. Today's podcast, we want to continue working through the 7 steps to worker retention as provided in this 7-part series of podcasts that we are doing for you. In this effort, we want to zero in on our 6th effort called Responsibility Enhancement. The first 5 steps to employee retention have already been presented on earlier podcasts, and you can find those if archived on the app. For a quick review, though, of all 7 steps again, the following provides a reminder to the components addressed to strengthen the retention effort with today's workers. Step 1, onboarding. Step 2, the 90-day plan. Step 3, skill training. Step 4, coaching and mentoring. Step 5, engagement and participation. Step 6, responsibility enhancement. And then step 7, performance reviews. Now, while our approach in this series has admittedly been directed at the new worker, many of the steps, especially steps 3 through 7, are really applicable for all workers. The second step, especially the 90-day plan, could be utilized for any employee who has just assumed a new job title or job function. Now we specifically address our next step, step 6, responsibility enhancements, which will prove to be a critical action for contractors to employ, not only to gain greater retention, but to also raise performance results and profitable work. Before we explore how to give more responsibility to a worker, a question we should ask is, why is giving responsibility to a worker important to the employee retention discussion? Briefly, when a new worker has come on board, there is an expectation that it will take a period of time for the employee to learn their job, learn about the company's work culture, work processes, and to learn about their new coworkers. Obviously, this can involve a different range of days, weeks, or months depending on the individual, and as we've discussed in other podcasts, on the contractor themselves. Again, having an onboarding effort prepared and executed, developing a stronger skill training effort, along with the other steps we've presented, can all make a very positive impact on the new worker's company embedding experience. But what impact does giving an employee more responsibilities really have on their remaining longer with the contractor? The single most important reason is related to the fact that most workers want to progress in their jobs. Perhaps not progress in reaching a higher level or position, such as becoming a foreman or a project manager or a vice president. They may not want to be an owner of their own company someday. But progress in the context of how we're using it here is more related to just wanting to know more about how to perform their current job, at least to a greater level where others don't think of them as being unskilled or worse, just plain stupid. So one of the proofs that a worker is progressing in the organization, growing in their capabilities and skills, is when the individual can begin to receive tasks that require a higher level of responsibility to accomplish. Another proof is when that same individual is thought of as trustworthy, capable of working independent, of having a leader standing right over them as they work. Now, most of the better workers we might employ want to be sure of their efforts, confident that what they do each day is right, appropriate for the need, and accomplishes some end result that produces quality in a safe and profitable work fashion. Workers who experience such things are more often satisfied with themselves and more likely to stay with the contractor who's enabled them to feel and experience those types of things. If this sounds a bit crazy, just consider some comments that I've actually collected from employees who quit their contractor. I've heard things like, "My boss never gave me anything more difficult to do. She didn't show me what she was expecting. I never really knew what I was supposed to do and why. Therefore, I felt really stupid. They just threw me out there and expected me to figure it out for myself. Geez, the contractor made me feel like a child, standing like right over me while I was working, like I couldn't do anything without his oversight. The contractor never gave me a chance to learn another position or another skill. And finally, he was the only one that ran the equipment. He never let me even try to learn how to operate any of the equipment. Now, just because an employee wants to learn how to operate a backhoe or to run a paver doesn't mean that their contractor should give them the chance to learn. However, when better employees are limited in what they can learn, when they are prevented from taking on more difficult challenges and responsibilities, these better employees often look to leave. Such motivated workers rarely remain with the contractor for long if they're not being given the opportunity to grow. So, when does a contractor begin to add more responsibility to a new worker? The answer I hear the most from contractors is, well, whenever the employee demonstrates that they are ready for more. But herein lies another challenge for many contractors. A, what does a worker have to do to demonstrate that they are ready? B, what does ready mean? And C, does more mean more physical work, more responsibility, or more of both? For some contractors, such considerations never really cross their minds. A new worker is hired and immediately exposed to, well, here's how we do things here, and then expected to pick up the unique processes and how-tos used by the contractor's other employees. Now, if the new worker picks things up quickly, great. If they don't, the new worker may be teased, harassed, ignored, or simply fired because, quote, they just don't learn fast enough. While all new workers will not always work out for the long term, a good percentage of new workers are often not given the chance to hang around long enough to prove what they can grow to become. So what might be some considerations that a contractor should have or make about their new workers before they move on to either separate the worker from the company or move further to add to the worker's responsibilities? This really falls in line with how a worker might demonstrate their readiness to take on more responsibility. Consider using the following techniques when observing. First, realize that every worker is unique and different, possessing different learning styles. Come on, we all know that. Some of us who have children know that some of our kids learn by doing, some kids learn by reading, some kids learn by watching, and even some kids learn by listening. We need to figure that out with our own workers. How do they learn? Yes, many workers learn by hands-on doing, but they oftentimes can just as well learn, at least some of the early beginning steps, on watching and observing other people. Another suggestion, go back and really execute our steps for employee retention, steps number 1 through 5. There is simply no excuse for not doing orientation, training, coaching, all the things we've already talked about. Another idea, get a feel earlier about what the worker wants to do, what they want to accomplish, and what they feel most comfortable with, confident in doing. Many employees may feel that they can do other things or are drawn to do something else in the company. Ask them about that. Don't not ask. Go ahead and seek them out. It doesn't mean you have to do that immediately. But the fact of the matter is most employees perform better if they're doing something they enjoy doing. Another suggestion, try out a new worker on some different job functions. Confirm what they appear to be good at with the actual work results. Make the time to allow them to practice, maybe after hours or on the weekends. Another suggestion, notice the response of a new worker after they've made a mistake. Do they run away, want to try again, shut down because they are depressed? Look at the way they respond to making a mistake. Is there a competitive nature in them that wants to prove that they can do it as much to themselves as to you? Another suggestion, how late do they arrive to work, return from breaks, pack up and leave at the end of the day? This has a lot to say about their work ethic. Now, that doesn't mean that one day a week or one day a month, they might not come in a little bit late or leave a little bit early or want to pack up and go quickly. But what it does say is look at the trends over the course of weeks and months. If you find that you have an employee that's coming to work a bit earlier, shows up early, takes a little bit more pride in preparing their work area, tends to look out over the other guys, maybe looks out to pick up trash on a job site. Those type of attitude employees may be signals to you that they can progress, they want to move on. Another suggestion is, what questions do they raise about their current job function? I mean, you can find a lot about where they're at in their learning curve by just the questions they ask. So if they don't ask them to ask questions. And if they do ask, don't blow it off too quickly. It may give you an idea of how well you're actually doing the teaching. And then a final suggestion is, does the employee volunteer when given the chance to learn a new job task or to join a crew that will be challenged with a greater amount of difficulty? In other words, does this employee run away from hard things in the job? If they do, maybe they're not ready to progress. But if they're not afraid to jump in and really tackle a task or to volunteer even to take on a difficult task for a project, maybe that's the employee you ought to be spending some more time with. Well, I think you get the idea here about what signs might be observed from a worker projecting their interest or focused on growing in their current role. Now, let's not place any super high expectations on their effort or progress, but we should recognize some of the items that we've just talked about. The second question presented earlier in this podcast was, what does really mean? Well, I'm not real sure that maybe this is a contractor making it more difficult than it really has to be to determine a worker's readiness. But here are just a couple of things you might make note of and keep this in mind. Is the employee definitely performing work with greater confidence? The employee is assisting others in tasks that they have completed in the past. An employee is asking fewer how-to questions, which means they may be really getting it. The employee actually works, their actual work results are reaching very good to excellent-like status, on a more regular basis. The employee is teaching or coaching others on how to execute a task or complete a process. The employees, even next seniorly, that might be just the foreman, it might be a superintendent or a project manager. Any of these leaders they're very comfortable with and confident in the employee's efforts. The employee may be filling in for their leader for short periods of time. They may actually be taking on a bit more leadership responsibility. The employee has directly informed the contractor that they're ready for more. They want more. And then finally, another observation is the contractor clearly recognizes that the employee is ready for more and can provide greater value to the company by being in a different role with greater responsibilities. The third question presented earlier in this podcast invites the contractor to really consider how much more can the employee really take on, and does this only suggest more physically or more responsibilities or some combination of both? Well, depending on the next level of responsibility that an employee might take on, the answer is most likely both. Whether your employee is a laborer, crew foreman, lead person, superintendent, or department manager, almost any additional responsibility will require an increase in their physical effort while also assuming more responsibility for their work performed. But for the worker desiring greater responsibilities, recognizing that additional focus, acquiring better skills, spending more time reading or being educated, that these are all just part of getting more on one's plate. Responsibility enhancement is less about dumping more stuff on workers and more about contractors really recognizing the readiness of a worker for growth and responsibility. The contractor who takes his or her time studying their employees' strengths, weaknesses, their likes, their dislikes, and the employee's future goals and expectations is the contractor who will be much wiser in preparing their workers for greater responsibilities. Such a contractor is simply going to retain their workers longer and drive performance improvements and the profitability that often parallels such improvements more consistently over time. A final area to consider that may not always be so upbeat and positive. What happens when a contractor tries to properly enhance their employee by giving them greater responsibilities and the employees fail? Well, while this can be frustrating for both the contractor and the worker, this isn't the end of the story. Anytime a worker, especially a newer worker, is to be given greater